Hi, everyone. David Aragona and Mike Beer here, taking a look at one of the future races on Saturday at Keeneland. The ninth race on their card is the Grade 2 Elkhorn, going the mile-and-a-half distance on the turf. Before we get into the field for that race, though, it's the time of year to start thinking about your Kentucky Derby handicapping, and we've got these Derby packages available. If you're going to be buying Oaks and Derby PPs, just bundle them all in one of these packages. You get betting strategies, the player's guide, clock reports from Mike Welsh and his team, and you can save up to 39% of the value of all of those things together in one package. Explore those Kentucky Derby packages at shop.drf.com. Well, Mike, we've got an oversubscribed field for this Elkhorn at Keeneland on Saturday. 12 runners in the main body of the race, one also eligible, Native Shaman. Maybe we'll touch upon him briefly at the very end. But it seems like a highly competitive group. I've got to say, I was a little surprised to see such a clear-cut favorite on the morning line in the number 6 Limited Liability, who is listed at 8-5. But I suppose he is the horse to beat.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I mean, I think he might be the horse to beat too. I don't know that he deserves to be that short a price on the line. This is a really competitive race. Most of the major protagonists in this race are already stakes winners going long. We have a prior winner of this race in the field. There's a lot going on here. I think a lot of different horses can really make their presence felt in this spot.
Let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this Elkhorn. And pace scenarios can be kind of tough to read in these long races because it's so much up to how aggressive the jockeys want to be. But it does, Mike, feel like the two horses that are shown leading on the pace projector are probably going to be the two that go out towards the front end, since Dean Martini and I'd Rather Be Blessed have just done all their best running when they are forwardly placed. Particularly, I'd Rather Be Blessed, who wired a field setting a slow pace at a big price last time.
Yeah, they're both also big prices on the morning line for this race. So you sort of get the idea that they'll be going forward. And here, the key to, in my opinion anyway, the key to this whole pace thing is the morning line favorite, the 6 Limited Liability. Ever since Frankie Dettori took over on this horse, David, he's been way more aggressive with Limited Liability. And it's actually really worked to this horse's advantage, I think.
Let's go through this field, beginning from the rail out, starting with the number 1, Rebel Red, one of a couple of Cherie DeVoe trainees in this race. And Mike, this horse steadily improved through last season, despite having an incident last summer at Saratoga where he lost, I think it was his left eye in a paddock incident, but came right back out of that, produced one of his better efforts in an allowance race victory over this Keeneland course, and then 2 back, stretched out to a marathon distance for the first time in the Red Smith, and finished in a photo for second with Limited Liability that day. So clearly handled the trip there. And I guess you could argue his last race was just to prep off the layoff.
Yeah, I kind of looked at it that way in the most recent start. They just sort of rated him back in that spot. He was running on through the stretch, but it wasn't really that kind of race where you wanted to be making up a lot of ground. David, I don't know if you agree with this or not. I thought his Red Smith was a really, really good performance, going 11 furlongs. I mean, we were talking about Limited Liability being way more aggressive, and Limited Liability actually forced this horse's hand really early in that race, and Rebel Red was not letting him get by through most of the stretch. He finally relented after integration, ran those 2 horses over, but I thought that was a really strong performance going long for the first time.
I will just note, it seems like Jose Ortiz, his regular jockey, has been cognizant in the last few races to keep him outside of horses, I guess, to keep his vision optimized. And I wonder how that's going to work with him drawing the rail here. He might have to save ground from this inside post. The number 2 is Grand Sonata. And Mike, I can't say I've ever been the biggest fan of this horse, but he does just keep showing up and putting forth solid efforts for Todd Pletcher. And it seems like he's actually gained a bit of consistency since they focused a little bit more on some of these longer races. I mean, look, he had no business in the Breeders' Cup Turf last year, but you throw that race out and he's run well in a few of these 1 3/8, 1.5 races. He generally works out good trips for himself because he's fairly versatile, and he could have another trip coming drawing post 2 here.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, I think pretty much the take on this horse is on paper. I mean, he shows up. He's very, very consistent. Distance is a real positive for this horse. His most recent start here, I don't know that I felt like he had some kind of big excuse in this race. He does get wired by one of his stablemates in here, but overall, I just thought he was within range in a clean trip. He finishes really gamely like he always does, and he just misses in this spot. I guess unlike you, I've always been a big fan of this horse, but mostly because, especially early on in his career, he was just, to me, always overlooked. He would never get bet, but he would always show up and run really good races. I love horses like that. We'll see what kind of price he settles at in this spot, because to me, he should be one of the favorites.
Yeah, he's the top finisher from that McDermott coming back in this race that we just took a look at. I think some other horses had more interesting trips in that race. We'll get to them in a little bit. The number 3 is Dean Martini, who, as we discussed with the Timeform US pace projector, is likely to be one of the horses going forward in this race. Mike, I just have trouble pointing to the race and his past performances that really makes him appealing for me to bet here. He does have a victory three back, but that was an off the turf race over the dirt track at Laurel. And while he's run okay on the turf and distance works for him, just seems a little overmatched at this level.
I agree. This is a really good field for this kind of a race, and I just didn't see him necessarily, even if he somehow managed to get loose on the lead. And I don't think that's going to happen. I still don't think he's good enough to wire this field. He's 1 for 17 on the grass in his career.
The number 4, Verstappen, is actually the winner of the Elkhorn going back 2 years to 2023. And he's a horse that clearly loves these longer distances on the turf. Mike, if you're going to make a case for him, you kind of have to get past the last race at Turfway Park, where he was just no factor in the Kentucky Cup Classic, going 1 mile and an eighth on the all-weather track. And while he is a horse that handled synthetic early in his career, his last couple of performances in that very race, the Kentucky Cup Classic, going back to 2024, and then recently the last start in 2025, he's just been really no factor, not seeming to handle the surface. So maybe as he's gotten later in his career, he's just developed way more of a turf affinity as opposed to other surfaces. But if you cross that race off, he makes a lot of sense in here.
Yeah, I agree with that. And especially because he's 15 to 1 on the morning line too. I just sort of wanted to stay positive on him because listen, distance is no issue for him. And I know he's good enough if things break his way as far as the trips go. He's good enough to be right there at the end of this race. His Connolly 2 starts back. He ran well in there, David. He didn't have an excuse. It looked like he had every chance to win. He just sort of got dueled down by a Maker horse, and you just can't beat Maker in that Connolly at Sam Houston.
Mike, I've kind of been wanting to make the number 5 Utah Beach into one of the top players in this marathon turf division. And he's shown hints of ability along the way, and he's definitely appreciated the distances getting longer, but he hasn't quite gotten to this level just yet. And I was trying to find some excuse in his McKnight 2 back. I liked him in that race and got a pretty good trip. He was wide early, but eventually got to the rail on the final turn and was just kind of staying on at one pace. I did think he ran okay last time on the all-weather surface in that Kentucky Cup Classic, but he just hasn't really produced performance that makes him a win candidate at this level.
Yeah, I'm with you on the race 2 back in particular. I kind of wanted to see him run a little bit better in that race, especially because the pace was there for him, man. They were really going up front in that race. He had a really nice setup overall, and I was just a little disappointed in that performance.
The number 6 limited liability is that 8-5 morning line favorite. And I guess I kind of get that, Mike, when you look at his body of work in terms of the speed figures, because he's just run faster numbers than a lot of horses in here, though that 102 buyer was earned in a 2+ mile race at Kentucky Downs. I'm not really sure what that means. I think the point that you were making earlier about the change in running style since Frankie Dettori took over is an important one to discuss, because it worked out when they were aggressive in that Kentucky Downs race. The trips the last couple of times, maybe not ideal for achieving the optimal results, though.
I agree. I mean, obviously, it worked so well in Kentucky Downs that I guess that Frankie just decided that that's what he was going to do with this horse going forward. We're looking at his most recent start here in the McKnight, and it did not really work out for him here. He was aggressively ridden from the start, but there was another speed in the race who refused to concede to limited liability here. They went pretty fast early. He's dead game through the stretch, trying to fight off the closers, but he couldn't do it. I thought he ran well there. I thought he ran really well in the Red Smith 2 starts back, where same thing with Dettori's last early and just decides to make this big early move around the first turn to go up after the pace. He ran well that day too. He might be the horse to beat. It's your call how short you want to go on him as far as price goes.
Yeah, I think the takeaway with the change in tactics for me is he is a difficult horse to ride, because when you hold him up and try to make that one late burst, he doesn't really have the finishing speed to match the turn of foot of some other horses in here. So you want to make an early move, but you do have to time it right. We'll see if Dettori is able to do it in this race. The number 7 is Anglophile, and he's another one coming out of that Mac Diarmida at Gulfstream Park in early March. And Mike, he didn't have quite as much trouble as a horse that we'll get to in a little bit, but they were both somewhat affected by a horse that kind of steadied in mid-pack heading into that first turn, and he found himself towards the back early and just kind of stayed along the inside. He was making up ground at the end in a race that was dominated towards the front end. And I feel like this horse might be cycling back up to a better effort, because he came off the layoff 2 back in the McKnight, didn't do a whole lot of running in there, but the Mac Diarmida was certainly a step in the right direction. Mike, my main takeaway with this horse is he's just not one of these Gulfstream Park turf horses. He prefers these turf courses in Kentucky. He's run better here. Well, not at Keeneland, but he's run well at Kentucky Downs in the past, at Churchill. And he has just gotten a series of trips in some marathon races that have not worked out for him. And I'm hoping that Joel Rosario can kind of give a similar ride to last time, saving some ground and maybe getting over this Keeneland turf course. It works out better.
Yeah, gonna agree with all that stuff. And he ran an underrated race last time. It's not like when you go back and watch it, you're gonna see a ton of trouble for this horse. But once he wound up, back off the pace on the rail, Rosario just kind of had no choice but to sit in all the way around the track there. He was lacking a little bit of room, and then he was actually finishing really well in that race. Just way too late.
The number 8, Old Crazy Bone, is going to be a very big price in this race. He finished behind Verstappen, who we talked about already in that Connolly Stakes at Sam Houston back in late January. Came back and beat a much weaker field at that same venue against Allowance Company last time. Like, when I watch this horse's races, I feel like he's heading in the right direction, and there is some potential here. He actually lost some momentum coming to the quarter pole in that Connolly and probably could have finished a little closer to Verstappen with a clear run. He's going to be a gigantic price in this race, and I'm not going to be shocked when he produces a career best effort.
Yeah, I agree too. When I went back and watched that Connolly as well, I just felt like if you wanted to argue to me, he was unlucky, more unlucky than even appears in that race, and was going to be a lot closer at the end. I would certainly agree with you. I don't know that makes him a contender against this field, but at a big price, I would stay interested.
The number 9, Missed the Cut, is also coming out of the Mac Diarmid at Gulfstream that we've discussed a few times already, and he's the one, Mike, that really had some significant trouble. It actually seems like the chart callers at Gulfstream missed it, but it is tough to view replays at Gulfstream unless you're watching multiple camera angles, and they do give you plenty of camera angles to look at in the pan shot, a little hard to follow. But if you want to go back and watch the head-on, if you're handicapping with Timeform US or DRF Formulator, it's much easier to see what happens to this horse. There was a runner in mid-pack that should have been more aggressively ridden, but got very rank and then was badly steadied out of position and Missed the Cut, got caught in behind that horse. And Mike, he went from mid-pack all the way back to last in the first couple of furlongs of this race. And that's not the way this horse really wants to run. He's got plenty of form going back to the early part to middle of last year that would make him really tough on this field.
Yeah, exactly. He just had so much trouble in the last race. And once he sort of checked out of that good early position, Gaffalione just sort of sat last on this horse all the way around the track and let him run through the stretch. To me, that's just a no chance trip. You throw it out. I'm still a little conflicted, David. I do like his turf races. Once they stretched him out, especially early last year, I do think he ran really, really well in those races. And even when they shipped him here for the Elkhorn early last year, I thought he ran well in that race also. I struggle when I look at those California long distance turf races because I know that the competition isn't as tough in those races out there as they are here. So, we'll see. But this horse is good to me, and he's going to get a way better trip in this race because he's way more tactical than he was able to show in the Mac Diarmid last time. A better trip should be coming for him here. He's a contender in this race.
Yeah, I think the key for him is going to be price because he was favored last time. And if the bettors do go off him with that poor result showing, then he becomes more appealing. He is 6-1 on the morning line. The number 10 is Starting Over. And this horse is kind of starting over now, Mike, as an 8-year-old. He got into very good form for trainer Mike Maker, who stretched him out in distance, something that Mike Maker does so well when he takes over training of horses and, tries these marathon distances. They can often reach their best form. And that's what happened with Starting Over when he took down the Mac Diarmid going all the way back to 2024. But then we saw him once in the United Nations over the summer. Not a good effort. Now switches to Brittany Russell off the long layoff. Just hard to really trust this horse.
Yeah, I didn't really want him in here. He's another one who's got a race or two that's going to give him a real chance in this race. He did run well in those 2 Gulfstream races early last year. I just sort of missed a lot of time since then. I don't know that Brittany Russell's very good. She wins a lot of races. I don't know that I'll expect her to improve this horse off of Maker.
The number 11, I'd Rather Be Blessed, pulled off a huge upset last time in the Muniz Memorial Classic at Fairgrounds on that Louisiana Derby Day undercard, winning at 86-1, leading the field every step of the way. And Mike, it's easy to say in retrospect, you go back and look at that race, and sure, there was quality in that field, but there was really very little speed signed on, and Ben Curtis was able to take advantage of it, putting this horse on the front end, backing down the pace, and he had enough left to finish off that race and hold off all of the closers. There probably were some horses in there that were not primed to run their A efforts, some that maybe didn't get ideal trips, and he saved a lot more ground than others, so that probably contributed to the result. I mean, look, he does have some form going marathon distances earlier in his career, but I feel like it's going to have to catch lightning in a bottle twice to beat another field at this quality.
Exactly. He's not a bad horse at all. But you are talking about a horse who really took advantage last time. To pull off an upset. He's probably not getting that trip in here because there are horses that can keep him honest, up on the front end. We'll see. Listen, he's another horse. He's going to be a big price right back in this race. So I don't really want to knock him too much, but I also don't want to bet him.
Like, I'm curious to know what you make of the number 12 Balnikov, who obviously does not draw a great post position in this race, but we'll take a look at his Hollywood Turf Cup 2 back at Del Mar. Actually, the only time in his life that he's tried this mile-and-a-half distance. He's primarily gone shorter than this throughout his career, but he ran okay this day. He's a horse that has a big finish on him, and we'll see if it's as effective over the mile-and-a-half at Keeneland. But he's run plenty of speed figures that make him one of the top contenders in here. It's just he doesn't win all that often at this stage of his career.
Yeah, he doesn't. And he's got a running style that, will lead to a lot of seconds and thirds and maybe not as many wins because he's always at the back of the pack, but he's got a big kick on him. My take on Balnikov is every time I see him in the entries, I want to bet him. I'm a big fan of his. I don't care what the distance is. I don't care if they're sending him down the hill. I don't care if it's a mile or a middle distance race. I don't care if it's going long. He's a really good horse. I'm a huge fan of his, but he's clearly going to need a trip against this field.
He is pretty versatile. I do wonder about him going this far because it seemed like he was going to win that Hollywood Turf Cup, and then the runner-up, the eventual winner, I should say, came back on him at the very end of the race. Just brief mention to the number 13 Native Shaman, Mike. I feel like this is a horse that has potential. He's moving in the right direction. It's just asking a lot of him at this stage.
I agree. I actually like his races. I don't know that this is the spot for him, as they stretch him all the way out.
Let's throw up our picks for this grade 2 Elkhorn at Keeneland. And Mike, you're going to go with that horse that had the early trouble last time, the number 9, Missed the Cut.
Yeah, listen, your point's well taken about prices in here, David. He was favored last time. I wouldn't go too short on him. If he is, around that morning line price, I could take a shot with him because I do think he classes up really, really well here. I put the two horses who are probably going to be the favorites underneath in this, but I don't need either of them, the 2 or the 6, at really short prices. If for some reason Missed the Cut really gets bad, I'll take a stablemate down on the inside, Rebel Red. I think that horse has a real chance in here.
And I know from my picks, it might look like I'm way against the number 6 limited liability. For me, it's just a value thing. He's a horse that I don't totally trust on the win end, given how difficult he is to pull a trip sometimes. And I just didn't see him as the value, as the favorite in this race. And I've got Mike's pick in there, but I went with the number 7 Anglophile, who is supposed to be a fair price in here. I thought that he has a right to move forward now, third off the layoff. He's going to appreciate this Keeneland turf course more than Gulfstream Park, and he's probably going to be double-digit odds. So 7, 9, 4, 8 for me, and 9, 6, 2, 1 for Mike in the grade 2 Elkhorn at Keeneland on Saturday. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.